All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome into today's lesson. We are going to get started talking about what is critical thinking. So, the thing that brings us all into this classroom, this shared community together, is that mission, that requirement that as college educated adults, we have some understanding of how to use critical thinking. So this lesson and then the follow-up reading later in the module is going to begin to get into the nuts and bolts of what do we mean when we talk about critical thinking. I'd like to give a little preamble, just acknowledging the fact that there's no one widely agreed upon definition or overview of what is critical thinking. Every course that you take is going to highlight different features of critical thinking. Every book that you read is going to emphasize different practices for critical thinking. So I'm just presenting, my take on what I think of the most valuable kinds of skills for our students to understand. So without any further ado, go ahead and grab your however you're going to take notes, whether you're going to open up a Google Doc and type along, whether you like to go out pen and paper, or if you just want to pull out your phone, start a notes app and type. I like to take notes on my phone all the time, but I do like to do it in Google Docs. So I like to have just like a 1 semester long fall 2025 English C1001 notes doc that I can use. So that's my advice to you. Pause here if you need to get prepared, get settled, get hydrated, and then join us when you're ready to begin. All right, today's lesson is Introduction to Critical Thinking. We're going to be working towards some of these C1001 objectives, namely to reflect critically on one's own thought processes, to identify and avoid cognitive bias, to define, recognize, and utilize forms of critical reasoning, including deductive and inductive reasoning, and distinguishing knowledge from belief and fact from judgment, as well as to evaluate sources with respect to their relevance, reliability, and appropriateness to the rhetorical situation. So we're not going to dive through every layer of those objectives, but we are going to learn some concepts and vocabulary that we can use when we critically reflect, to self-reflect and self-evaluate on our own opinions, assumptions, ideas, thoughts. We're going to learn some differences to distinguish between like knowledge and belief, judgment and fact. And we're also going to learn a set of 9 criteria that we can use to evaluate sources or evaluate ideas. Starting off, in this lesson, we're going to go over, first of all, the concept of critical thinking. So what is it? And look a little bit at its relationship to creative thinking. We're going to look at shifting that true-false binary, recognizing facts, recognizing assumptions, and evaluating ideas. And then we're going to finally finish with a discussion of why we value critical thinking. So in order to get through the system that is higher education, at everywhere you turn, it seems like somebody is demanding that you demonstrate your knowledge of critical thinking. So why is that so important? And we're going to look at how critical thinking is a really empowering tool that helps us construct, deconstruct, and reconstruct our understanding or sense of reality. So that's an overview. Let's get ready to jump in. Please remember to take notes, share your questions or thoughts using the discussion space below. And there's no need to record everything that you see here. You don't have to write it all down. Use your judgment and just sort of highlight some of the ideas that stand out to you the most from each slide. There's no wrong way to do this. So being kind with ourselves, being gentle with ourselves, focusing more on thinking about the material through the video, pausing from time to time to consider how that connects with your mindset, rather than copy, 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 copy. Okay, so let's jump in. First of all, what is critical thinking? We're going to look at its definition and its relationship to creative thinking. First of all, we'll look at what's called the morphology of the term. So that's just breaking the term down into its parts, critical and thinking. Thinking is a culturally learned habit of perceiving, noticing, inferring, judging, wondering, deciding, creating, making connections. So sometimes we think like thinking is just a natural process. Everyone's thinking all the time. And to some extent, that is true. Like our brains are always working. But when it comes to truly thinking about things, it's a culturally learned habit. So if you think about also your classmates in this class together, your community here in the wider college, in the wider city, we are all conditioned or taught from a young age, first in our families, our churches and communities, our schools, our clubs, our organizations. We are all taught to think a little bit differently. There's a little bit of cultural difference, which is amazing. And then when we look at the term critique, so that's the part of the word critical. So critique means to analyze something piece by piece and then to assess it or judge it based on a set of criteria, a set of evaluation standards. Critical thinking doesn't mean thinking that is intended to criticize, disparage, or insult something. Similarly, critical thinking doesn't mean like thinking that's super important. Although, of course, it is important to know critical thinking, and through our evaluation criteria, we do often find ourselves disparaging something as inaccurate, outdated, etc. But that's not the main goal. Critical refers to this goal to critique thoughts. Putting it all together, then, critical thinking is when we evaluate, so judging based on those criteria, when we evaluate our own thinking processes along with our culturally conditioned thinking processes, the thought processes that we observe in others, all of these ways that we, these habits and these ways that we have learned to perceive, infer, avoid, or ignore, assume, and decide. So we break down our thinking process, kind of labeling it, what kind of thinking that did I just do? And was that thinking high quality? Was that a high quality thought that I just had? Was that a high quality thought process that I just went through? Or were there mistakes, biases? Was it a little bit lazy? So a lot going on, just breaking us into that word critical thinking. I mean, it's an English class, you guys, so we're going to be looking right up close and personal with phrases, concepts, and words. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between critical thinking and creative thinking. So something that we might be familiar with by this point in our education is this idea of the left brain and the right brain, whereas one half of our brain houses creativity, emotion, expression, and imagination. And then the other half of our brain houses analysis, logic, language processing, number processing. Um, to some extent, that is a big oversimplification. These two parts of the brain are not truly separated with a brick wall in between. I'd like to share a quotation from Albert Einstein, and this is dubious. I'm not 100% sure when or where he has said this, but the attribution is pretty common. The man says, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the whole world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. So I just wanted to share this idea as we unpack a little bit the relationship and the combination between critical thinking as something that does connect with creative thinking. If we look a little bit at the parts of the way we use our mind, we might think of creative thought as something that is intuitive and holistic, something that relies on visual imagery, symbols, feelings, memories. Creative thought is really useful in order to form and create new kinds of content, new kinds of structural arrangements, or new types of ways of creating relationships, new aesthetic styles, and all of that type of creativity really trickles up in wrong button, really trickles up into our other realms of thinking. If we look at critical thought as we know it best, it tends to be verbal. So expressing these things through clear language, linear, logical, analytic. Also thinking about the language of like mathematics, for example. We have these ideas, these concepts, these observations, these theories that we're imagining. Is this true? And if we can prove that we can express those things in language of some form, that makes it closer to true. Critical thought is how we organize our perceptions into meaningful connections, meaningful structures, and meaningful patterns. So with creative thinking, we might come up with, oh, that's a structure, that's a pattern, that's an arrangement. Then we use our critical thinking to sort of apply that pattern onto the world that we're looking at and say, okay, this, these all fit into this pattern, for example. And then also, as we mentioned on the last slide, critical thought helps us to evaluate content, ideas, statements, claims that are already existing. And then when you look at the next level and think about in terms of imagination, imagination is something that helps us to develop new ideas, combining our creative and critical thinking, helps us to solve new problems, things that we've never encountered before. Think new feelings, new images. We can see, look into our bag of tools and see how we might solve those things. We can use our imaginative thinking to infer hidden meaning or ambiguous meaning. So we have like the surface level, and then we can infer like what's really going on here. What might be the possible assumptions? What might be the possible bias here? What's motivating this idea? Imaginative thinking also helps us to step outside of our own sort of bubble and stand in somebody else's shoes and imagine or consider an unfamiliar viewpoint. Really empathize with another person, sympathize with their point of view, things like that. We use our imaginative thinking, which is a combination kind of critical and creative thinking. It also helps us to predict the implications or consequences of thoughts and actions. So this comes into play a lot during analysis. So if we're writing an argument and we're either we're maybe disparaging or refuting somebody else's argument, we might be saying, yeah, well, look at the consequences that might befall from that way of thinking. That's one way that we use imaginative thinking as part of the critical thinking process. And then similarly, when we're producing our own argument and we're saying, yeah, this is what I believe we should be doing. This is how I think we should solve this problem. And if we do that, look at these benefits that are going to come out of that. We're using our imaginative thinking to push our analysis. So that's kind of a lot to take in. Let's pause here. Look back at the notes that you have written. Think if you have questions, comments, or thoughts. Maybe you'd like to share something from your own experience, looking at maybe your experience with this interwoven connection between creative, critical, and imaginative thinking. Maybe you have an alternate take on this and you want to share that. Please use the discussion space anytime that you would in like a face-to-face classroom. If you feel the urge to raise your hand, if you feel the urge to speak out loud, I welcome that, but we have, limited in this virtual space, a little bit limited. Please share it in the comments. All right, moving on, we're going to look a little bit at true or false, destabilizing this binary between true versus false, navigating through contestable facts, multiple truths, and hidden assumptions. So keep up the good work. We're doing good. We're on part 2 of 3. So when it comes to recognizing truths and recognizing facts, we might be familiar with kind of putting it through this stress test of, first of all, is that even true? Is it objective? So is it true for everyone all the time? Is it provable? So can I sort of like repeat it? Can I show evidence of it? And is it concrete? So we can't have abstract ideas and call those a truth. It needs to be something concrete, measurable. If we have STEM students, which I know are lovely STEM students, we might be able to discuss further. You can add it into the comments. Like the scientific method. There are some like rigorous ways of testing results to see if they are accurate and true. You can share that in the chat. But I want to open this up a little bit, remembering, yes, we are in English class, we're in the liberal arts, we're in the humanities and social sciences. We want to make space to acknowledge objective and subjective truths. So dominant intellectual values, that just means the most common, popular, like elevated trends for intellectual culture. Dominant intellectual values are incredibly logocentric, meaning that they tend to favor logic, reason, and proof as the like supreme foundation of knowledge. Knowledge that comes through those rigors is always held traditionally always held to be like more valuable, more real. However, recent scholarship trends within the last 20 to 30 years, even in its like 20 to 30 years, like on a exponential curve, are really recovering this lost recognition that feelings, instincts, and intuitions can and do play a valuable role in building valid forms of knowledge. So this is kind of like when we talk about like decolonizing education, decolonizing academia, it kind of means opening up this space to where the descendants of the Enlightenment have been like ruling hard with logic and proof, but there have been vast losses of, colonized and subjugated people who had carried real valid knowledge and wisdom that was just expressed in a different way. Usually through perceptions, through the body, through language, memory, emotion. Think a little bit, for example, the rhetoric of embodied knowledge. When we think about the phrases like trust your gut, or I know it in my bones. And let me see if I can move this because it's covering this word. Okay, sorry. So to dig into this idea of subjective truths, I want to introduce a phrase, conocimiento. It comes from the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, who is like a critical thinking and writing scholar. Pretty much it refers to a complex body of knowledge that emphasizes personal and social transformation, which is a huge theme of education as a whole. The emphasis on knowledge as a tool that empowers us toward personal growth and transformation, coupled with social growth and transformation. So let's look at one of my favorite quotes. Gloria Anzaldúa says, let me see, attention. So when we remember going back to thinking about critical thinking, and we learned about like these culturally shaped habits of attention. Okay, attention is multi-leveled and includes your surroundings, bodily sensations and responses, intuitive takes, emotional reactions to other people and theirs to you, and most important, the images your imagination creates. Images connecting all tiers of information and their data. Breaking out of your mental and emotional prison and deepening the range of perception enables you to link inner reflection and vision, the mental, emotional, instinctive, imaginal, spiritual, and subtle bodily awareness. It allows you to link all of that with social, political action and the lived experiences in order to generate subversive knowledges. These conocimientos challenge official and conventional ways of looking at the world, ways that were set up by those who benefit from such constructions. So this quote really captures a lot of layers of meaning, taking us to the idea of decolonizing education by introducing subversive, alternative ways of thinking, knowing, expressing that are not made to serve the wishes and the wills of the conventional leaders, in a way to sort of challenge the norms that we might find to be toxic or harmful. So challenging those norms and introducing alternatives. And a lot of times that social and political action is informed by a network of diverse attention and awareness that encapsulates what we know, what we believe, what we feel, what we imagine. So that's just destabilizing this binary between true and false, objective or subjective, fact, belief, things like that. Moving on, let's look a little bit more at this idea that social reality is a little bit subjective. I'd like to share another quotation, and again, I'm in the way of the quotation. I'll just put it here. This quotation comes from Marles Mayfield, an author of a textbook, Thinking for Yourself. It's like a critical thinking textbook. It says, if you were to stand on a street corner and ask each passerby to define a fact, most would tell you that a fact is what is real and true. However, this notion is not entirely correct. Facts are only your interpretation of what is real and true. And sometimes these interpretations prove to be right, at least for a period of time, and sometimes dead wrong. Facts are not the equivalents to truth or reality. They are at best only our decisions about what seems to be most real. Human beings need facts facts because they need certainties in order to proceed through the world. But we should not forget that human beings are fallible. And I might add that, context matters a lot. And what is real and true now changes as context changes. So when we dig into this quote a little bit, we kind of find that not much in this world can be seen as an absolute fact. Most knowledge is a matter of convention. That means it's a matter of habitual agreement over time. Most truths are actually judgments about what seems to be true. And it's kind of nice because to recognize the socially constructed nature of fact and truth allows us to use our critical, creative, imaginative thinking to evaluate and critique those claims. We can evaluate and critique the assumptions, values, and judgments that stem from claims about truth and fact. So in one way, if we have this rigid binary between right and wrong, true and false, real and not real, objective and subjective, it shuts us down. It shuts down our thinking processes. It kind of makes us tunnel vision in, be like, okay, that's what's real, that's what's right, that's what we're doing, and sort of just follow along that line that is set up by people who are advantaged by that thinking, and it keeps us from pushing out the boundaries and challenging those systems. Whereas on the other hand, if we recognize truth and fact as a socially constructed habit, it gives us this invitation to look for problems and imagine alternatives, which is what we're going to be doing in this class. All right, so big ideas, some big thinking. Facts and truths can be partial, incomplete, temporary, plural, so multiple different ideas existing at once, and always, always, always contextual. So let's sort of massage our brains here, look back at the notes that you've written, take a few deep breaths. You can pause this video. Think, question, add ideas that you would like to add, and then we'll move on to our next concept about assumptions. So I'll give us a moment to pause, breathe, and then when you're ready, join us again. All right, so next we're going to dig into what are assumptions. And again, we're going to sort of take apart this term and do a deep dive into this word. Because it's a word like critical thinking, assumptions, is the terms that get thrown around without any precise or clear understanding. So today we're going to try and dig into that. So to assume kind of means to take. I like to use the bag as kind of like a bag of assumptions, the bag that we all sort of wander around with to make it through the world. And hopefully after taking this class and taking other critical thinking classes in college, you'll have another bag with your toolbox for critical thinking skills that you can use. Anyways, getting into it. To assume means to accept or hold on to a concept without questioning it, without really investigating and diving deep, or without re-evaluating it. We develop assumptions by accepting ideas too quickly, holding on to them for too long without reconsidering them. And assumptions usually have a significant impact on our judgments, values, and claims. So, and we've already seen how those three ideas have a powerful impact on shaping our view of reality, shaping our worldview. Assumptions tend to be unconscious. Hidden or unconscious assumptions often appear as stereotypes, which fail to account for the complexity of an issue, as prejudice, which casts judgments before really examining evidence, like prejudging, or stereotype, like black and white, left and right, like stereo when you think about your headphones, left and right, black and white. It fails to account for complexity of like maybe you have a 7.1 sound system, etc. And also hidden or unconscious assumptions appear as generalizations, where we just hastily sort out our data or our observations into these familiar boxes, rather than pausing to really deeply think about this new piece of data and see, like, do we need a new box here? Or I've noticed my boxes are getting kind of cluttered. Do I need to sort of spill them out, take a look at what I've got, and then resort through on my organizational system here? Kind of like some metaphors for what's going on in our minds when we carry these assumptions. And also, assumptions have a powerful impact on our values and beliefs. Some of our most powerful assumptions really are the hardest to A, recognize, or B, change. So an unconscious accumulation of unexamined ideas really does have a profound influence on our thought patterns, our judgments, and our actions. These beliefs and values are acquired through our entire lifetimes, personal experiences, family expectations, habits and norms, social ideas, cultural heritage, historical context. Even when we think about historical context, that even includes our ideas about the future. So either our hopes for the future or our fears for the future. These things heavily motivate, like those are all layers of boxing tape that are nailing down your existing collection of assumptions. And it truly takes vulnerability and bravery to cut that tape, open up those boxes and sort through some of those assumptions. So I do respect that in this critical thinking education that we're getting into together, we are going to have moments where I'm asking us to do that difficult work. So I will be doing my best to make time, space, so that you can take the breathing room that you need to do that difficult work when it comes to engaging with your chosen research topic. So a little heavy, lighten it up, lighten the mood. Have you guys seen The Princess Bride? It's like my favorite movie to watch when I'm sick. But this main character, he says, this one guy says everything's inconceivable, and this guy says, inconceivable. You keep using that word, but I do not think it means what you think it means. So I like this meme. It says, assume. I do not think you mean. I do not think that means what you assume it means. Anyways, fun. So then, in light of all that, critical thinking, subjective reality, assumptions are bad, right? Well, I mean, hold on, it's not black and white. We do still have to get through our day to day. So I'll share this next quote by Charles Van de Peer from the book Applied Thinking for Intelligence Analysis. This is like for analysts. Assumptions have been described as the most dangerous form of knowledge. Why? Because an assumption carries with it unconsidered information, knowledge that is not subjected to critique. That's what makes it dangerous. However, assumptions are a fact of life. We all have them and we all rely on them. The best that we can do is to identify them and make them explicit. So that's a big part of what we will do in project number 1. Problem solution impact. One of the ingredients is self-reflect and self-evaluate. What assumptions am I bringing with me into this topic? So it is hard work. It is a bit vulnerable. Like we said, you have to find that box cutter, cut those layers of tape off of that box. And I will do my best to make that uncomfortable process as easy as it can be. So do I have another quote? Oh yes, evaluating ideas. So in this world where critical thinkers have this responsibility to judge the quality of claims, facts, truths, and assumptions, we have some tools. In the midst of contestable facts, multiple truths, hidden assumptions, it can be overwhelming to begin that daunting mission. So we can begin with 9 criteria to help us critique and evaluate and judge the claims that we encounter. All right, so first of all, when we hear an idea, we can ask, is it relevant? Is this connected to our topic, or is it kind of distracting? Is this idea complete? Is it considering complex layers of meaning without really oversimplifying? Or is it just boiling us down to the black and white of the issue, the stereo? Is this fair? Does this idea seem to be impartial? Does it acknowledge various perspectives without bias, without favoring one point of view? Or does it exist as like, oh, this idea acts like it's the only idea that has ever existed or the only idea that has ever been valid? We can ask, is this thought accurate? Is this claim presented without lies, distortion, manipulation? Is this statement precise? Does it use specific and exact language, or is it kind of vague and ambiguous? Is it clear? Is this argument expressed with concise, simplified language, directly communicated, or are we seeing like overly technical language or overly confusing structures? Are these arguments transparent? So if you're basing it on, if there's evidence provided within this claim, can I verify the source of that information? Is the source ethically cited and ethically credited and attributed? Or is it super vague? Are these ideas current? Does this statement or this claim reflect recent debates, recent views, and changing developments? So is it current or is it out of date? And then also sound, and these are kind of tough and we'll be getting into them more throughout the semester, but I just want to, we're front loading here, getting a lot of vocab out of the way. Is the statement presented without fallacies of logic or reasoning? So we might copy these down, but these are things that I will be reminding us of when our assignments come up along the way as well. All right, that was a lot. We do need to learn to use both critical and creative thinking in order to really understand, infer, and evaluate the ideas that we encounter. So let's pause here. Let's look back at the notes that we've been taking. Hopefully your notes are including not just what's here on the slide, but as you're listening along, the ideas that are coming up in your mind as well. Those are valuable things to include in your notes. Really giving yourself space to lock in for 45 to 60 minutes and do this two-way street. Yes, I'm consuming this media, but as I consume, it's acting upon me and I am having ideas, thoughts, questions. I'm writing those down as well. So pause, look at what you've got. Questions and comments about recognizing and evaluating ideas. All right, moving forward. Final topic, you guys, we're almost to the end. Why we value critical thinking. And that's because critical awareness, discipline, and habits of critical thinking give us the tools to understand the world independently and to participate in the construction of meaning and value from an authentic and self-directed standpoint. And that begins with reading and writing. I know, of course, an English teacher will say that. But evaluating facts, truth, and assumptions allows us to determine for ourselves which ideas we will accept and what meanings we will make out of them. So I'd like to introduce some reading habits. And this can apply to not just when we read a book, anytime we're consuming media, anytime we are receiving messages. So this can be conversations as well. Reading is kind of like a catch-all for like interpreting and processing. So first of all, we can accept what we encounter. I call this reading with the grain. I'm trying to be open, sympathetic, so we can accept an idea that we encounter. And we do this when that idea aligns with our knowledge, assumptions, and values. So those boxes that we have, we're getting this new piece of information and we're saying, all right, yeah, I know exactly what box to put that in. I accept this. I understand this. And this usually happens when the claims, the premises, or like the underlying reasoning, along with the consequences of that claim, are judged to meet your critical thinking criteria. You're like, that's accurate, that's current, that's fair, I've got it, I accept this. I'm reading with the grain. And then we have reject. So I call this reading against the grain. This is when we actively criticize an idea along with its associated values or the consequences that that idea might lead to. And one of the ways that we do this is by undermining problematic views by using our critical thinking criteria. So saying the reasons why that view is wrong or bad, along with our, imaginative thinking analysis of how the premises are harmful or how the consequences could be toxic. So reading against the grain. I'm receiving information, I'm receiving a message, and I'm like, no, that has so much wrong with it. Let's pick it apart and let's show why this is unacceptable, which is something that's really important to do when we're looking at this long-term project throughout the course, where we're looking for problems, we're looking for solutions, and we're analyzing the impacts. That we need to use our reject skills. Then we can negotiate. So we can accept some of the merits of an idea while critiquing the premises, claims, or consequences. So it's kind of like a mixed response. I'm negotiating with this. It's showing the parts that are all right, showing the parts that have been led astray, and then finding a different way to approach. We do this by expanding on or revising an idea in order to account for alternative perspectives and viewpoints. One example of that is when I like to introduce students to this more open understanding of truth, fact, and reality as a subjective experience. I'm linking myself to very highly regarded scholars in order to do that, but I'm negotiating. Yes, reality is something that we agree upon. It's not fixed, it's not one-sided. So let's open it up to other forms of reality. So negotiating. And then shift. So if I'm receiving some messages, there's a conversation going on, and I say, I want to take this conversation and focus some of these ideas onto a slightly different context, then I would want to shift the discussion as a reader. So we do this when we want to change the focus of an idea and explore it through another context. So maybe we've been looking at the economic impacts of something, and I want to shift it and look at the environmental impacts. So I'm not agreeing or disagreeing really. I'm just saying like, oh, good discussion. I want to look over here now. So shifting. And this is another way that helps us to argue for new and alternative ways of understanding an idea. So these are some skills that, again, I will be reminding us and reiterating these skills throughout the semester. So don't feel like you need to copy everything down from here. But these are like the 4 main ways that we're going to be using our reading and writing. And then finally, the end, shifting your reality. I want to share one last quote, one of my favorite quotes from Paulo Freire in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He says, education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and to bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. So when we ask, why do we value critical thinking? This is why. Shifting your reality. And I mean, no, let's be real. Let's be so for real right now. Critical thinking about your topic, your research topic in English C1001 at DVC, that's not going to change the world. Like seriously. However, in this class, our deep thinking about real world issues will give us some time and space in this busy world. It will give us some time and some space to critique a problem and suggest a creative solution. Sustained questioning, research, and argumentation will help us all develop a starting point to participate in those issues in a way that is meaningful for you. So yes, we can approach this class as, you know, I have to choose a topic, I have to do these assignments, I have to get my 3 credits on my transcript. And for most students, that's what we're doing. But for some of us, we have some big issue that we really don't have the bandwidth in our daily lives to sit down and sort through and engage with. So I like to sort of push open some space that we can do that, to set you up for a start point to really continue that lifelong journey with that idea. So a lot going on. Before we close for the day, please review your notes, share questions, comments. If you're amped up about critical thinking, just me? Okay. Comments about critical thinking as an intentional meaning-making practice, critical thinking as a way to participate in shared social constructions of claims, truths, facts, and assumptions that we all call reality. So questions, comments, thoughts, ideas. And then if you are a learning leader for this presentation, please remember to share your 321 notes in the collaborative Google Doc. If you're still unsure about that, which I mean, we all do this 2 times throughout the semester, so it's like our first time for everybody pretty much. Come and talk to me. Let's talk about the lesson. Let's talk about what you might want to write down for your 321 notes. Anything else? Any more reminders? Reading and writing. Don't forget to continue working your way through your Canvas materials on your own schedule, completing the remaining discussions, readings, writings, assignments, and come into support hours. All right, I will see you all on the other side.